Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here to listen to my talk tonight. I am speaking tonight about queer theory or gender ideology. So I'm just going to pull up a screen here and we'll begin. There we go. So I'm here to give you a biblical response to an evaluation of gender ideology. Sorry. And I do have a PhD, but it's in theoretical chemistry. So technically I'm Dr. Neil Shenby, but I want to make it clear that I am not a medical doctor. I'm not here speaking from a position of medical knowledge or expertise at all. So just be very clear on that. I'm going to give you an overview of gender ideology as it's especially dependent on queer theory and as we're seeing in the culture today. So let's dive right into that. Here's my outline. First of all, why does it really matter? Why should we care what's going on out there in the culture within gender ideology and queer theory? Then second, I want to understand the ideas that are at the root of this gender ideology we're seeing in culture in universities today. Because before we can critique it, we need to understand it. What are these ideas? What are they based on? How do they think about sexuality and gender? And then in the third section, I'll engage these ideas biblically. What can we say about gender and sexuality from a biblical perspective? In the fourth section, I'll talk about some practical questions like what is intersex? Should we use people's preferred pronouns and so on? Then the last section, I'll recommend some resources for further reading. So let's begin with this question, why does it matter? J.K. Rowling, the beloved author of the Harry Potter series, who is very progressive, has become somewhat of a social media pariah or a heretic. Why? Well, she's very progressive. She thinks that you should marry whomever you want, date whomever you want, love whomever you want. You should be able to express your gender however you want, but she insists that biological sex is a real category. As someone who's been sexually abused herself, she thinks it's very important to affirm that biological sex and biological women are a real and important category that should be socially recognized. And because of that, she's become somewhat of an outcast. All of the stars of her Harry Potter movies, they issued statements saying things like trans women are women. And it sort of an explicit contrast to what J.K. Rowling says, which is that no, actually biological women should be distinct and recognized as a distinct category. There you go. All of our Harry Potter stars like Daniel Radcliffe, Emma Watson, Rupert Grint all issued these statements saying transgendered women are women, trans people are who they say they are, trans women are women, trans men are men, trans women are women, trans women are women, trans men are men. So that's not a single statement they all signed. Those are independent but eerily similar statements they've all made about her comments. Here's another example of gender ideology in society. This is the gender-bread person. It's a very popular graphic you can find all over the internet, and it explains how modern queer theorists think about things like gender identity, gender expression, biological sex, and sexual orientation. Now notice, there are 4 different axes here, all of which are completely independent. So historically, traditionally, you have 2 categories, male and female. And if you're a man, then you are biologically male, you identify as male, you express yourself as a male in your culture, then you're sexually oriented towards women whom you will marry maybe one day and then have children, right? That's traditionally how we think of sex and gender. They're all connected. But today we see not just 2 categories, but 4 different spectra, and you can be any place along any one of these spectra. So for example, you might identify as a woman, but express yourself as masculine, but biologically be female and sexually oriented be towards bisexuality, right? So you could be anywhere along these 4 axes, and they're totally independent according to the new gender ideology, which I'll explain later. Another example, recently a CNN article, it's a news article that was talking about a law passed, executive orders passed, I think in South Dakota, related to transgender. And in that news article, they wrote, it's not possible to know a person's gender identity at birth, and there is no consensus criteria for assigning sex at birth. Now, I'm old enough to remember that a movie called Kindergarten Cop came out decades ago starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. And in that movie, this very innocent but candid kindergartner says, boys have a penis and girls have a vagina. And that was this hilarious joke because he was totally oblivious as to how inappropriate that was for this kindergartner to say. But fast forward to 2021, and we have CNN that says there's really no consensus for knowing how to assign sex at birth. Now, it is true that in very rare cases, a specialist has to be called in because a child is born with ambiguous genitalia. But for 99.9% of births, yes, you look at the genitalia and you can assign people as either biologically male or biologically female. We'll talk about intersex conditions later in the talk. But this was a news site reporting straight news, and they're saying there's no consensus criteria for assigning sex at birth. They later, about 24 hours later, they removed this line, but it was up there for 24 hours. Black Lives Matter is a very prominent activist organization that purportedly addresses issues of racial justice. But on their website a few months ago, you could see their statement of beliefs, and that involved many statements about gender and sexuality. For example, they said they want to do the work to dismantle cisgender privilege and uplift Black trans folk. They said they foster a queer affirming network. They want to free themselves from the tight grip of heteronormative thinking, the belief that all in the world are heterosexual. They sell t-shirts that say Black future is queer. So in their minds, race and gender and sexuality are all intertwined. And finally, just this month, it's June 2021 as I'm recording this, and Blue's Clues, which is a very popular children's cartoon, I think it's aimed at kids, ages 3 to 8 maybe. They put out a cartoon for Pride Month featuring a drag queen singing songs, a song to the tune of the Ants Go Marching. But the lyrics said things like this: "These babas are non-binary, they love each other so proudly. Ace, bi, and pan grown-ups, you see, can love each other so proudly, and they all go marching in the big pride parade." And that cartoon actually featured a beaver with double mastectomy scars. That was very deliberate. This beaver, it is a beaver, but apparently it was intentionally chosen and drawn with scars showing that she had her breasts removed. And that was very, again, deliberate. They did that. Okay, so what's going on? What are all of these ideas, these images, where is it coming from? And so that's what we want to understand today. But first of all, why should we really care? Well, two reasons. Number one, we want to equip our children as Christians to understand what the Bible has to say about sex and gender identity, right? And so in order to give them a biblical view of these topics, it's important to know what the culture is teaching that is contrary to what the Bible says, right? That's so you can most effectively equip them to engage, to understand the culture, and ultimately to say what's wrong with what the culture thinks about these ideas. But also, as Christians, we want to be able to share the gospel with people who are outside of the church, who are not Christians. And so to do that effectively, we should try to understand the ideas that they've embraced that are contrary to what the Bible teaches, right? So it's in the same way that if we want to be a missionary to, say, Hindus, it's important to understand what Hinduism actually teaches, right? So in the same way, we want to share the gospel with people who've embraced gender ideology or queer theory. It helps to know what those disciplines actually teach. So I'm going to focus on three big ideas that are taught by queer theory, or call it gender ideology today. So where did these ideas come from? Well, queer theory as a discipline maybe officially began in 1990 at a conference on queer theory, the first one on queer theory. But the ideas go back farther. You have people like Adrienne Rich writing about gender and sex in ways that sound very familiar. And if you ask queer theorists today, they rely very heavily on the work of postmodern philosophers like Jacques Derrida and Michel Foucault, writing in the 60s and 70s. So maybe officially queer theory began in 1990, but it has earlier antecedents within, say, the French postmodernists and other thinkers. And even you could go back to maybe the second wave feminists too. But it is a new discipline. So within the last, say, 30 or 40 years is really when it has its most proximate roots. Okay, so what are the three big ideas? The first is sex versus gender. So according to queer theory, sex and gender are completely different things. Again, going back to that figure of the gender-bred person, they had one axis for biological sex and a different axis for gender identity. Not gender exactly, so we'll talk about it in a second. But biological sex, they say, refers to the objectively measurable organs, hormones, and chromosomes And there you have things like, yeah, female means they have a vagina and other secondary sexual characteristics. Men have a penis and other and testes and other secondary sexual characteristics. And there is a category of intersex, which is not really on the spectrum. It's a little complicated. Again, we'll talk about that later. But that's sex. And then you have gender, which, as we'll see, they've defined as a social construct. It's a category that human beings have invented, have constructed to group humanity into these two categories of men and women. So you have biology on the one hand, then you also have gender, which is a social category, not an objective metaphysical category, okay? And then this other category of gender identity refers to how you, in your head, think about yourself. You say, which socially constructed gender category do I belong to? That's what gender identity is. How do you see yourself? So again, sex is biological, but gender identity is how you conceive of yourself. So I've heard it said sort of plainly that sex is what's between your legs and gender identity is what's between your ears, in your own mind. Okay, so here are some quotes to that effect. So here's Ricky Wilkins in her book, Queer Theory, Gender Theory. Gender is a language, a system of meanings and symbols, along with the rules, privileges, and punishments pertaining to their use for power and sexuality. Okay, so gender is a language. It's a socially constructed category. Here's Judith Lorber in her essay, Night to His Day. She writes that gender and sex are not equivalent, and gender as a social construction does not flow automatically from genitalia and reproductive organs. Finally, here we have Anderson and Collins in their anthology, Race, Class, and Gender. They write, gender, like race, is a socially constructed experience, not a biological imperative. Sex refers to one's biological identity as male or female. Gender refers to the systematic structuring of relationships between women and men in social institutions. Gender is a learned identity, right? Something that we create as a society. We put people into these two categories, these two buckets, and gender identity is your sense of which bucket you belong to. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, here's a good analogy, I think, for what they mean by a social construct. Imagine we have social categories for jocks and nerds. They're kind of loose, broad categories, but there are, so-and-so's a jock. You know what that kind of means. So-and-so's a nerd. You kind of know what that means. So these are clearly, they're socially constructed. Other cultures don't really have jocks or nerds. The same stereotypes don't really apply in those other cultures maybe. But just imagine that we had connected in history contingently. We'd all decided that jocks are defined as anyone over 6 feet tall, and a nerd is anyone under 6 feet tall. So what a jock theorist might do is say, now wait a minute, I'm a jock theorist. You're confusing biology, how objectively tall you are. It's a biological category, I agree, with a socially constructed category called being a jock or being a nerd. Those are totally unrelated to the biological objective measurements we can make of how tall you are, right? So in their mind, that is what sex and gender are like. We have these real biological categories or real biology, say, and then we've on top of that falsely associated them with these purely social constructs, these social categories, jock and nerd. So in their mind, they're trying to disentangle and disconnect the biology from the social meaning. Okay. Second, not only is gender socially constructed, but gender and sexual norms are oppressive social constructs. So here again is Ricky Wilkins. Western thought, she says, tends to cast any difference into opposing halves that between them exhaust all meaning. These are binaries, like, she says, masculine, feminine, man, woman, top, bottom, butch, femme, and real, artificial. We want to explore, reclaim, and uphold. In the end, that's what Western society wants to do. We have these binaries. Everyone's either A or B, male or female, masculine or feminine. But in the end, binaries are not just a curious way we have of understanding the world. They are political. They're about power. They create hierarchies, male, female, white, black, colonial, native, that produce winners and losers. Right? So she's saying it's not like we just randomly have these two categories. No big deal, right? Like you have Cubs fans and not Cubs fans. Yeah, no big. No, she's saying actually you're creating implicitly a hierarchy. One group is on the top; they are good and normal and right. The other groups on the bottom, they are abnormal and perverse and other. And that's what gender does. It creates winners and losers, or men are the winners and women are the losers. And more than that, people that don't fit into those traditional categories are considered other and weird and strange and abnormal. Okay, here is Anne-Marie Jagos. She writes that the gay liberation movement of the 60s understood that the marginalization and devaluation of homosexuality was affected by that dominant and rigidly hierarchical conceptualization of sex and gender, which constituted the social norm. Right? So they're saying the gay liberation movement, she's contrasting that with other earlier, they're called other movements. But she's saying that they realized that their liberation depended on breaking down this dominant hierarchical conceptualization of sex and gender. In order to liberate homosexuality, gay liberation was committed to eradicating fixed notions of femininity and masculinity. That move would similarly liberate any other groups oppressed by what it critiqued as normative sex and gender roles. So you understand that she's saying the gay liberation movement wanted to unsettle and dismantle these fixed notions of male, female, masculine, and feminine, because that we saw it as being oppressive. Here's Blumenfeld. He writes that heterosexism, which has its roots in sexism, is the institutionalization of a heterosexual norm or standard, which establishes and perpetuates the notion that all people are or should be heterosexual, and it thereby privileges heterosexuals and heterosexuality and excludes the needs and concerns, cultures, and life experiences of LGBTQ people. So like gender is an oppressive social norm, and it contains oppressive social norms, in the same way heterosexism, the idea that heterosexuality is the norm or standard for humanity, that itself is an oppressive concept. Here's another analogy. Imagine our jock sex analogy, or the jock nerd analogy. Jocks, we've wrongly had this idea that jocks are anyone over 6 feet is a jock, anyone under 6 feet is a nerd. And more than that, it's not that we're simply confused about the difference between biology and social categories, but more than that, we've attributed these stereotypes to the jock category. Things like they're strong, they're athletic, but they're also unintelligent. They drink beer, they wear sports jerseys and varsity jackets, they drive sports cars, listen to Pink Floyd, they live in their parents' basement. On the other hand, nerds are anyone under 6 feet, and they are stereotypically, they're weak, they're unathletic, they're intelligent, they drink milk, they wear suspenders, they ride a bicycle, listen to classical music, and they also live in their parents' basement. Okay, so do you understand that in some of these stereotypes, they're all stereotypes, but thinking that someone is stereotypically strong or maybe athletic or intelligent, they drink milk. Those aren't necessarily oppressive. They're just weird stereotypes. But other norms, other expectations, like they're unintelligent, they're weak, they're unathletic, those are clearly wrong, and they're in some ways oppressive. They make people conform to certain standards they might not like. So for example, if I'm 5'10", so I'm a nerd, maybe I like drinking beer, or maybe I actually, even though I'm 5'10", I'm actually pretty athletic. So the point is, they would see gender stereotypes, gender norms, and certain values as the equivalent, the analog of these stereotypes. They're oppressive. They classify people and group them and assign them to certain roles in society, which are wrong and inherently oppressive and demeaning. Okay. Lastly, oppression is intersectional. This is increasingly true today and in organizations like Black Lives Matter. So here's Alan Young, who's cited in Jagos's book, Queer Theory. He says, gay liberation also had a perspective for revolution based on the unity of all oppressed people. That is, there can be no freedom for gays in a society which enslaves others through male supremacy, racism, and economic exploitation, that is classism. Here's Wilkins again. Race is inseparable from other dimensions like age, sex, class, sexual orientation, and gender. Proponents of critical race theory, she means, are reimagining race, racial identity, and its intersection with homosexuality and even queerness. This is exactly what we see in Black Lives Matter's belief statement, right? They think that race and race issues are inseparable from sexuality and gender and other issues, right? They all have to be dismantled simultaneously. And here, Anderson and Collins again, and the way they're conceptualizing race, class, gender, sexuality, and all these other factors are the same. They actually make the comparison themselves. Like racism, sexism is a system of beliefs and behaviors by which a group is oppressed, controlled, and exploited because of presumed gender differences. They make the same analogy to homophobia, which is oppression based on sexual orientation. So the point is that today, in today's culture, and today, talking to queer theorists today and critical race theorists today, they will always think about race, class, gender, sexuality, gender identity, all these different factors in the same way. There's always an oppressor group and an oppressed group. And you really can't separate activism on behalf of one oppressed group from the other groups that are also seeking liberation from these oppressive norms and values, these oppressive ideologies. Okay, now notice I have not criticized any of these ideas. I'm trying to simply explain them to you, often relying on the explicit statements of authors like these, in order so that we can critique it. I do want to critique these ideas, but before we critique, we have to understand, right? We don't want to go into a conversation with misleading ideas about these ideas or creating straw men that are easily torn down. So I hope I've given you a quick overview of what queer theorists or people in the gender studies field largely believe. Okay, and here's a good figure from Cinso and D'Angelo's book, Is Everyone Really Equal?, showing you how they think about race, class, gender, sexuality, religion, physical ability, etc., etc. They're all interrelated forms of oppression. Okay, so now I've just presented what the main ideas are within, say, queer theory. How do we engage these ideas from a biblical perspective as Christians? Let's start with this. Gender is a God-ordained category. Now, you say, well, do you mean sex? Because sex, okay, God created human beings and everything in the universe. And so are you saying sex is a God-created category? But what about gender? Is that a cultural thing? Well, no, here's the way to think about it. In the Bible, there are just two categories. There's male and female. And in the Bible, throughout the Bible, it's assumed that if you have a male biology, you are called a male. You identify as a male. You will eventually get married to a female and you will produce offspring. And so in the very beginning, God created male and female. That refers both to their biology, but also to these two categories. So I would just say that sex and gender are just really ways to express the same categorization of human beings into these two categories, male and female. And that is, again, Genesis 1 talks about God creating male and female, but Jesus himself affirms that the creation of male and female, that God made them male and female. He's quoting Genesis chapter 1. And what's more, he connects that to marriage and says, for that reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, cleave unto his wife, and what the two shall become one flesh. They are joined in marriage into a one flesh union. And actually then out of that union, they will produce offspring. This is a male-female marriage, right? So the point here is that God is the one who created these two categories. Now, I think I use sex and gender interchangeably, even though I understand how queer theorists tend to separate those two words. In the dictionary, you'll find that historically there's synonyms, but in modern English, they're often used in two different ways. I understand that. I'm just saying the way to approach the subject is to say, look, in the Bible, there are two categories. They are rooted in biology, but then a person with a male biology will identify as a male, express themselves as a male, and be attracted to females, and eventually, again, in theory, get married to a woman and produce children. That is the categories that God ordained, and that's important to restate. Now, you say, well, are you sure is that the way to think about it? I mean, is it really something important that God created these two categories? And I would say, yes. Why? Because throughout the entire Bible, we see God using this male-female categorization to illustrate deep spiritual truths about himself or about us. But here's a good example. In Ephesians chapter 5, he talks about how wives and husbands, he gives them different commands. Wives, submit to your husbands. Husbands, love your wives. And what's more, as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. So the point is, he's not only saying there are these two categories, men and women, wives and husbands. He's saying that husbands, your love for your wife, your willingness to sacrifice for her, to give up your very life for her, is a picture of how Jesus relates to the church. And again, throughout the Bible, we see God relates to his people as a husband relates to his unfaithful wife. But we are always given this male-female illustration in a variety of settings to illustrate spiritual reality. That's why it's so dangerous to get rid of those two categories, because we're actually getting rid of the very means by which God chooses to express spiritual truth to us. We don't understand what a wife is and what a husband is, then we're going to lose the importance or the implications of these passages. So again, male and female are God-created categories, they're God-ordained categories. So we have to emphasize that, but also they're good categories. Genesis 1:31, God said everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. There was evening and there was morning the sixth day. So in the Bible, God's creation of male and female are seen, they're not oppressive categories. They're not harmful categories. They're ways that God expresses his creativity, his wisdom. And so I think we have to not only say, yes, God ordains them, but everything that God ordains is good and for his glory. And again, in Revelation 21, another illustration, the New Jerusalem comes down from heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. So at the beginning of the Bible, we see this God's creation of gender. The end of the Bible, we see God using gendered language, gendered imagery to express profound spiritual realities. So that's why gender is such an important category to retain. Okay, let's talk about then social constructs. You say, well, wait a minute. I get that there are these two categories, male and female, that God ordains, but clearly some of the associations we have with men and women, some of those, they clearly seem to be cultural artifacts. Example, is blue for boys and pink for girls? So, well, yeah, you buy a little baby, a boy baby, a blue blanket, and a girl baby gets a little pink blanket. But well, with that identification of a color with a gender, something that we've decided as a culture. You go back 500, 600 years, and pink was seen as a masculine color. Why? Because pink is like red, and red's the color of fire and blood. So, in a war. So, the funny thing is that's something that as a culture, we've decided that blue is for boys and pink is for girls. But, metaphysically, it's not like pink is a feminine color and blue is a masculine color, right? Here's another one. Men shouldn't wear skirts. Well, think about it. What if you're in Scotland? I mean, a kilt looks a lot like a skirt, doesn't it? So in the US, sure, if a man were wearing a kilt and we didn't know what it was, we'd say, he's wearing a skirt, he's wearing women's clothing. But in Scotland, warriors wore kilts that looked like skirts to us. The point again is that as a culture, we've decided that men, skirt-like things are only for girls, but in other cultures, they might think that they're also for warriors. What about a toga? I mean, togas are almost like dresses, but men wore them in the ancient world. So my point is that there are some elements of gender expression that are socially constructed. So we should be very careful to hear closely to what the Bible teaches about what is sort of God ordained and what is simply something that our culture has agreed upon as a convention. Now be careful here. Does that mean, therefore, that it's totally fine for men to wear stereotypically women's clothing? And I would say no. But why is that? Is it because kilts are only for girls? No, it's not it. The point is every culture has ways within that culture to express their gender, to say, I am showing the world that I am a man. This is how I do it in my culture. I wear pants, I wear a dress. I don't wear makeup, I wear makeup. I have long hair, I have short hair. By the way, here's another example. Women have long hair and men have short hair, but how long is long? Again, in some cultures, men had hair down to their shoulders, and that was considered a masculine thing. And women had much longer hair than that. The point is there's not a prescribed hair length in the Bible, but I think that we do want to express within our culture that I belong to a male or female category, and I delight in that. The reason it's wrong, say, for men to do stereotypically female or female clothing, for example, or to wear makeup, is not because there's something inherently wrong with that. I think if an actor wears stage makeup because otherwise his features will be washed out, I don't think he's sinning. But why do we do that, say, if you walk down the street? Because we're expressing in our culture to the world is, I reject this category. When you deliberately say, I'm to take on the expression of gender that is typical of the other gender, people are going to assume that you're rejecting your God-given gender. I think as Christians, we say, no, I delight in being a man, and my wife delights in being a woman. My daughters delight in being females. My sons delight in being men or boys. But I think that's why we don't deliberately transgress these expressions, not because we think they're metaphysical statements that God has handed down to us from on high, because they're our culture's way of expressing the category we fall into, and we can say we delight in being male or female. It's a good gift from God. I think there are other sort of grayish areas. For example, boys like trucks and girls like dolls. Is that a social construct? Well, in some sense, yes. They didn't have trucks 2,000 years ago, right? Or airplanes, say. So clearly liking airplanes is not a masculine thing. And yet we know from lots of studies in child development that boys do tend to gravitate towards objects and moving toys, and girls tend to gravitate towards dolls. Even newborns, there have been studies that show that there are these sort of differences in gender toy preferences at a very young age, too young to be plausibly socially constructed. Does that, by the way, but be careful, and this is a really important trap that Christians fall into. What Christians can do is they can say, because boys tend to like trucks, say, and fire engines and dinosaurs, and because girls tend to like dolls and I don't know what else, cooking or whatever that typically is feminine and masculine traits are, because those two genders tend that way, therefore boys can't like dolls and girls can't like trucks. And if we see the girl or the boy expressing an interest in those toys, we smack their hand and say, those aren't for you. Now, again, be careful here, because actually, ironically, we're falling into the queer theorist way of thinking about gender. If a boy likes a doll or a girl likes a truck, does that make them a girl? But if a girl likes a truck, does that make her a boy? No, it's not. What makes you a boy is being in a God-ordained category, right? Which is obviously seen in your biology. Liking certain activities. If a man, men tend to like hunting more than women. Women tend to like cooking more than men, at least in our culture. I'm not sure about all cultures, but clearly they're great chefs for men, and there are women who love to hunt. Hunting does not make you a man, and cooking does not make you a woman. Jacob liked cooking; he stayed among the tents, right? And Esau liked hunting. So and obviously Jacob was the chosen son in that family. My only point is this: be careful of making some activity or preference the sign of being male or female. That is the way that gender ideology teaches us to think, but it's not actually biblical. Again, we want to express ourselves in ways that show the culture that we delight in our masculinity or femininity, yet we should not absolutize these expressions as if you can't, I do most of the cooking in my family, right? I just do. It does not make me feminine. And I know lots of women who like to, not lots, but I know women who like to hunt. It doesn't make them men. And we should really resist that and say, no, we can, I think there's reasons that men do tend towards certain activities and maybe professions. Yet I would not make that a way of assigning gender. That's a wrong way to think about these categories. Okay. Third, some but not all norms are oppressive. So think about these. Again, be careful here. There are cultures in which women are not educated and are told they should not be educated. That is oppressive. It is, because the Bible tells us that wives and mothers should help raise their kids. And part of raising and educating your kids is having an education yourself. You can't teach your kids to read if you can't read. So clearly, women should be educated, and we should oppose social norms that say they shouldn't be. But there are other norms that no one thinks are oppressive, like you shouldn't walk around naked in public. That's kind of a hygiene thing. Or men shouldn't express emotion. Really, look at the Psalms. Look at David expressing emotion all the time. Look at him weeping publicly. So some of these norms are actually unbiblical and even oppressive, and we should oppose those. But other norms are sort of just wisdom, like children shouldn't be left unsupervised. And other norms, things like a wife should take her husband's last name, is that in the Bible? No. And yet I think it's a good way for us to express the idea that husbands have responsibility and leadership in the family. And that, by the way, that's not a lucky us, man. Most guys I know would much rather pass the buck to someone else. Someone else can lead my family, but it's a serious responsibility that God gave, I believe, to men. But that norm, so forget that. The norm, for example, that the husband should be the leaders of their family, right? I think that's commanded in the Bible. That's therefore not an oppressive norm. It's actually a good norm. It's not a social construct, something that God has ordained for our own flourishing. Okay, but I think, again, be careful when your kids approach you and say, are you saying that all gender norms are ordained by God? I'd say absolutely not. There are some gender norms that are just socially constructed. They're conventions, like blue is for boys, pink is for girls. Are all norms oppressive? Well, some are and some aren't. So this is where we have to just study the Bible and say, what does the Bible say about each of these subjects? Oh, and by the way, in case anyone was wanting to go back, I said that I think there's evidence that men are inclined towards certain professions and women are inclined to certain other professions. I think that's probably controversial. I probably should have qualified that, but I think there's just scientific evidence that given a choice, men tend to gravitate towards object-oriented professions. Women tend to gravitate towards people-oriented professions. Those are just tendencies, but there are a lot of scientific studies showing those tendencies. And obviously, I am not at all saying that women are not qualified or capable of being scientists. My daughters are great at math and science, and I'm encouraging them to go. And so I'm by no means saying that those are absolute divisions. I'm just saying that they tend to that. I think we shouldn't therefore say one. We shouldn't say women can't do math and science, men can't go into, say, nursing. We shouldn't say that. We also shouldn't be terrified that you have to encourage your daughter to go into SEM fields, science fields, if she doesn't want to. Give people the choice of what they want to do. That's all I'm saying there. We don't have to assume that every inclination or tendency has to be either embraced as basic to gender or rejected as oppressive. It's neither of those. I think the Bible gives us, a wisdom to recognize that some of these norms are constructed and some of those norms are oppressive, but some are not. Okay. Next, love does not require affirmation. It's a big one. We are often told that if we don't embrace queer theory or gender ideology, then we are unloving. But love requires truth, because the truth will ultimately lead to the other person's flourishing. A simple example, if you have kids, that your kids want to do things that are very harmful for them. Nobody, do not eat that broken glass. I know you really want to. I know you're tantruming now because I took the glass away, but eating that glass will hurt you. That is the truth. And I have to because I love you, I have to tell you that. Now, obviously, other adults are not like our own children, right? We have to trust them in many more ways to make their own decisions. And yet, if we believe something is false and dangerous and harmful, we cannot say, well, I love them, so I'm going to pretend it's true and good and beautiful. I have to speak the truth in love. And the Bible is full of this, that part of loving people is telling them the truth. Now, again, doesn't mean you have to be a jerk because we speak the truth in love. We tell them the truth with grace, the grace that we've been shown in Christ. But the point is simply this: do not confuse loving someone with agreeing with them. You can disagree and still love them. In fact, you can disagree because you love them. You do not want them to embrace falsehoods and error, because those things ultimately will hurt them. Okay, so those are, again, so I've given you why does it matter? I've given you the basic ideas of queer theory, and I've given you some biblical sort of pillars to guide our thinking about gender, sex, and sexuality. So what are some practical questions now? First, what causes gender dysphoria? Here's the answer. No one knows. I mean, you can look all over the place. No one, and most reputable medical sites will say nobody knows. There are lots of speculation, lots of hypotheses, but no one knows. Gender dysphoria means a feeling of discomfort and distress about a part of your body. And gender dysphoria means that. Gender dysphoria means feeling uncomfortable with your biology, your sexual characteristics. Feeling like something is wrong with having, if you're a biological male, you feel like your penis doesn't belong on you, or women might be uncomfortable having breasts. That is gender dysphoria. Feeling is not just a little bit uncomfortable, but deep distress over your biology. But what causes that? Again, no one knows. Second question. You often hear that transgender people have the brains, their physical brain structure resembles the brains of individuals with their experienced gender. So in other words, transgender males, that is biological women who identify as men, that those brains look like the brains of biological men. So they're biologically women because they're transgender, their brains look more like biological men and vice versa. And I often see claims like that in the popular press. Are those claims true? Well, I've gone and I've read a number of the studies that have been highlighted as showing that transgender brains resemble the brains of their experienced gender. And frankly, the results are, at the best I could say is they're very inconclusive. Here's an example of the actual data. So here's a study that showed they did measurements of the volume of a certain region of the brain. And you can see here that biological males here had this volume measurement and this number of neurons in that region. They have the measurements shown here, and here women. What you notice immediately is these two distributions overlap. Sure, the men had a larger volume of this area, and the women tended to have a smaller volume. But look at all the overlap. Look at a person who has a value around here. Is that a man or a woman? It really could be either, and it's probably more likely to be a man, but there's a large overlap region. Now look at here's the data points for male to female, meaning biological men who identify as women. What you notice is each of these dots is one of the patients. Notice that the distribution looks more like the female distribution than the male distribution. That's true, and yet there are two big points here. One is that, say, this individual right here, you can't look at just that number and say, oh, obviously that's a biological male, or obviously that's a biological female. You can't really tell. There's a lot, again, because there's so much overlap in these distributions. It'd be like saying, imagine you said, you have a distribution of heights. Men tend to be taller than women. And yet if you found an individual who is 5'7", could you reliably say whether that's a man or a woman? The answer is no, you couldn't, because there's a lot of overlap between male and female heights. So in all of these studies that I've seen, the actual data, there's tons of overlap between the supposed male brain and the supposed female brain. And then when you look at transgender individuals, they don't clearly map onto, oh, they clearly have a male brain and they clearly have a female brain, because those brains don't exist. There's no such thing as a male brain or a female brain, unless you're looking at chromosomes, I guess. So generally speaking, when I look at the actual data from these studies, there is not conclusive evidence that transgender people have the brain of their experienced gender. That just doesn't hold up. The data is not there. Okay, next, how do I navigate gender ideology in the workplace? So what do I do if my workplace, has some policy about gender expression, gender identity? How do I address that as a Christian working at a certain company? To begin with, you should have good relationships, if you possibly can, with your coworkers, with your employer, with your supervisor. It should happen all the time, right? We always should strive, as Paul says, to live at peace with all men, to do good to others, to be good neighbors, and hopefully that will result in good relationships. And in that context, then, I'd say next, be proactive. If you are concerned that your company might publish a position paper or a policy on gender ideology, approach your supervisor proactively and say, do you have a plan like this in the works? Can I give you some input? So can I say what I believe about, say, it might be a hard conversation, but I think you want to be proactive rather than reactive. You don't want them to have already created a policy that you disagree with before you've even spoken to your supervisor. So I'd try to say, let me explain to you what I believe about these issues. And then can we craft a policy that allows it, and we'll get in a second, that makes room for my freedom of conscience. Fourth, do your homework. Please be able to speak about these issues, having read a few books about them, so you can appeal to science, maybe to medicine, to psychology, and say, here are the concerns that I have. You don't have to leave out your Christian framework. I wouldn't do that, frankly, but I understand that in a secular workplace, I think you want to rely more heavily on values they already hold. That's why I would appeal to next, freedom of conscience and compelled speech. So what I would say to a secular employer, you of course can say, well, I'm a Christian, I feel this way, but point out that lots of people who are not Christians, Jews, Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, even secular people, they might also feel uncomfortable embracing elements of this gender ideology. And therefore, we shouldn't force them to, say, sign a pledge they disagree with. We should leave room for their freedom of conscience, not just your Christian freedom of conscience, but everybody's freedom of conscience, right? We shouldn't, and then the last part, we shouldn't compel speech. And I understand that free speech, the First Amendment applies officially to the government, and yet most institutions want to uphold the principles of freedom of speech, and that extends to not compelling speech. For example, I would not want a company declaring that we will henceforth refer to President Biden as our dear leader. So when you refer to President Biden, you refer to him in our company as our dear leader, President Biden. That is now his title, that is mandated. I would object, not because I'm a Democrat or Republican, I would object because I do not want you to compel my speech. Right. So I think that's, so you press on those two issues, freedom of conscience. Like I would stand up, and by the way, be consistent here. You need to stand up for the freedom of conscience of non-Christians also. I wouldn't want a Jewish employee to have to say something like Muhammad is a prophet because they don't believe that, right? I wouldn't want a Muslim employee to have to say at a workplace that Jesus is God's son if they don't believe that. I would want to stand up for their freedom of conscience and not compel their speech. And so we have to be consistent here. You have to be willing to say, I want these values and principles applied to all our company's employees, not just me. Okay, but again, I think you're probably more likely to get a positive response if you rely on these sort of secular arguments rather than saying, well, because I'm a Christian, this is what I want. Make it more about values the company already hopefully holds. Next, should we refer to people by their preferred pronouns or chosen names? This is actually a very tough one for me. Initially I was like, you know what? I absolutely would say there are male and female. These are God-ordained categories. I'm not going to say that a person who identifies as a woman is actually a woman. I'm not going to do that. That would not be right. I think that my conscience would not permit me to lie in that way, because male and female are God's categories. I wouldn't want to give anyone the impression that you can just decide that you belong to one category or the other, right? However, what about pronouns here? So here's a picture. This is Buck Angel. Buck is actually a former porn star, and Buck is biologically female, but transitioned to male. And last year, George Takei, he played Sulu in the old Star Trek show and movies. But George Takei tweeted out this: when you defend so-called biological sex, you sound scientifically ignorant and you elevate transphobia. Buck replied to that tweet, I disagree with you. I am a transsexual man, meaning biological female who has transitioned to man. Transitioned from a woman to man 25 years ago. I am and forever will be a biological female. How is this so hard to understand? Okay, my point is, Buck says, no, I can embrace the reality that I am a biological female and still live as a transsexual man. What does that have to do with pronouns? My point is that there are people, even transgender people, who recognize that sex is a reality and yet simply want to be treated a certain way and to express themselves in a certain way. So my point is, not everybody, even transgender people, would affirm that wholesale gender ideology. So that should somewhat inform how we approach how they're thinking through these very issues. Now, okay, let me step back then. How do we think about these issues then? So understanding that my point is there's a spectrum, no pun intended, of belief even among transgender people. So how should we think about these issues biblically? One, our primary motivation has to be to honor and obey God. It cannot be love your neighbor first, and then we'll think about what God wants later. No, primarily, we want to honor what God says about any issue. And of course, one of the things God says is love your neighbor as yourself, but we cannot allow our love for neighbor, I'll put that in quotes, to determine what we do if we find that what we're doing is ultimately conflicting with what God wants us to do. We have to say God comes before everyone else. It doesn't mean be a jerk. It just means that my primary motivation is always to think God's thoughts after him, to honor God and obey God. And of course, then after that, because God commands it, we should love our neighbor. So what are some possibilities in terms of personal pronouns and chosen names? Because oftentimes transgender people will choose a new name based on their desired gender. I'd offer several solutions here. I think, first of all, last names. Referring to someone by their last names are gender neutral, right? So if you refer to someone by their last name, that avoids the need to refer to them as a pronoun, by a pronoun. So, I was called Shenvi in college all the time, but Shenvi is a last name, it's gender neutral. And I didn't get offended by that. No one seemed to think it was odd. People just call each other by their last names. So that's one possibility. If someone is transgender and you feel uncomfortable, you feel that your conscience would not permit you to refer to them by their preferred pronouns, use their last name. Another example might be politicians like Caitlyn Jenner is running, I think, now for governor of California. Refer to Jenner as Jenner. Refer to Jenner's campaign platform. And by the way, throughout this, I've been referring to Buck Angel or Jenner without using pronouns. But I find, frankly, if you look at this last page, I showed a picture because I do just say he sometimes because Buck presents himself as a male. And actually, going even farther back, the authors of some of the books that I was citing, so Ricky Wilkins and Anne-Marie Jagoz, I think they're both biological women and they identify, I believe, as women, but I didn't look it up. I think I tried to look it up with Ricky Wilkins and there's no information about her biology. I mean, kind of unsurprisingly, I guess, like you don't usually specify your chromosomes on like a Wikipedia page. My only point is like, I'm clearly not lying to refer to Wilkins and Jagoz as she, because I just don't know if they are transgender or not. I think they both identify as queer. But the point is, if you just slip up and refer to someone by the wrong pronoun, that's clearly not a sin, right? What I'm talking about is saying, no, I'm going to call them what they prefer. I think I would recommend, again, trying other options like last names. Proper names are chosen. Buck Angel, I don't know what Buck's birth name is. And frankly, people literally have changed their names on their birth certificate. So I'm just curious, what are you going to do if a transgender person says, my name is some name, and you're like, well, what's your given name? That is just, those are chosen. Those are literally on their birth certificates. They're on their driver's licenses now. They're legal names. And so I would just say, and oftentimes even some names are social constructs also. We've talked about how, some names, I think it's Lauren. There's some names that are in 19th century English literature. You'll find names that strike us as Americans as clearly, say, female names that actually were male names in 19th century England. So names are also socially categorized, and yet some are for both. Like Chris can be for either gender, and they change. So again, I would refer to people by their proper names, and if they've chosen that name, then I think you can use that. Because again, you're not, by calling someone that name. There's a song called A Boy Named Sue, right? And that's funny because Sue is obviously a gendered name, but the boy is named Sue. It's a Johnny Cash song. The point is that by calling someone their given name, you're not saying anything about their biology or even the category they fit into. That's just their name. And finally, singular they. The pronoun they. Some queer people desire to be called they them, referred to as they them, but some people don't. But I would say that's a good compromise because I looked it up. They has been used as a singular pronoun, a non-gendered singular pronoun, since the 14th century. I definitely colloquially have used they to refer to some person of unspecified gender. I went to see a person at the post office. They said I needed more stamps. Was it a man? It doesn't matter if the man, it was just they. So I think there are options for Christians to use last names, proper names, or even the singular they in place of gendered pronouns. I have to say, I've wrestled with this because originally I said, it's no big deal. If someone wants to be called he, him, or she, her, just do it. You're not making a statement about their actual biology or the category they fall into. But I have to say, thinking about the issue more carefully, I think what my main concern is this: by using a pronoun that refers to the opposite gender of the category they belong to. So if a biological male who's clearly a biological male wants to be referred to as she, her, by doing that, what am I saying about, what message am I communicating? Well, I can't get around the argument that I'm communicating that the categories that God has ordained are not really the categories that I'm going to use. I'm going to use the categories that these people have put themselves into. And I think I don't want to communicate that message. Now, I do want to communicate that I love people. I have multiple friends who have experienced gender dysphoria, and I want to love them. I want to care for them. I want to show them that I accept them and I love them. But I also, because I think what's best for every person is to embrace their God-given gender. Because of that, I don't want to maybe not harden them. What do I want to say? I don't want to affirm what I think is ultimately bad for them. The example that's often used is women and men who have anorexia. They can be literally starving to death, and they can insist that they are still fat. They can truly believe, they look in the mirror, they are literally starving to death, and they can see that they can believe they are fat. But if they ask me to call them fat, I will not call them fat. They might be insistent. If you don't call me fat, I'm going to be really angry with you. It's going to hurt me. It's going to traumatize me because I know I'm fat. And I have to say, I love you, but I cannot do what you're asking for me because I don't think it's good. You think it's good for you, but I don't think it's good for you. Now, I'm not saying those are identical issues. I'm just saying I do not want to affirm something that I think is ultimately hurting a person. So again, think about it in those terms. You want to honor God, number one, but also because of our love for neighbor, we don't want to affirm things that we think are ultimately bad for them. Okay, next, what is intersex and how is it different than transgender? So intersex, I'll just read the quote from the Intersex Society of North America. It's a general term used for a variety of conditions in which a person is born with a reproductive or sexual anatomy that doesn't seem to fit the typical definitions of male or female. Okay, so the bottom line is that sometimes babies are born and it's difficult to tell whether or not they're male or female. And sometimes actually the baby looks clearly, say, like a girl, and yet the baby has XY chromosomes. So there are actually a variety of conditions that would fall under this intersex umbrella, where for various reasons, whether it's chromosomal, whether it's hormonal, or other reasons, the person biologically has sexual characteristics that don't fit clearly into the male or female biological category. Okay, that's what intersex means. Now, how common is it? One number you often hear is 1.7%. However, I've seen numerous people say actually that's an extreme overcount. So here's a paper that says actually the true prevalence of true intersex, when you throw out these conditions that aren't really intersex at all, the true prevalence is around 0.018%, which is way lower. We're talking about 1 in 10,000 or 1 in 5,000 births or people are actually intersex. I think a better, so it's disputed because in what categories of what conditions do you qualify as actually intersex and which ones don't? A good number that I like to use is about 0.1%, because about 0.1% to 0.1% to 0.05% of births, so about 1 in 1,000 to 1 in 2,000 births, the genitalia of the newborn is ambiguous enough they have to call an expert to determine whether or not the baby is a boy or a girl, right? So that's happened in 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 2,000 births. So that's a good ballpark of how common intersex actually is. I don't think it's nearly as high as 1.7%. So it's a rare condition. How is it different than transgender? This is important. The intersex, judging by their actual literature, their actual websites and things, the intersex individuals and intersex community does not want to dismantle the gender binary. They say there are men, there are biological males and biological females, and intersex is not a third gender. It's not on a spectrum. So they don't really subscribe to that, and they many of them are actually very angry to be conflated with transgender. Why? What intersex is, it's a biological condition, right? It's about your biology. And what Christians would say is that biology, gender is rooted in biology. These categories are rooted in biology, but therefore, when your biology is unclear for either chromosomal reasons or hormonal reasons, when we don't honestly know biologically where you fit exactly into these two categories, well, then your gender is going to also be similarly ambiguous. It's very different from someone who says your biology is absolutely clear, and yet I identify as the other category. That's transgender. Intersex means your biology is actually ambiguous or unclear, and therefore clearly things like your gender expression would also be unclear. Now, there are other, I think, important and ethical issues that raise it. There's the questions like, well, if I am intersex, or if I have a child who's intersex, how should I know my gender? How should I express my gender? And honestly, I don't know, right? I think there are a lot of bioethicists who have thought about this question a lot. But my only point is we should not confuse people whose biology is unclear or ambiguous with people whose biology is clear and who still want to identify as the other category, the other gender category. So intersex and transgender are just different phenomena. So we shouldn't confuse those two. And actually, again, intersex, I know some intersex people who actually are adamant that please don't just think that we are transgender because we're intersex. We're different, and oftentimes they reject that kind of gender ideology. Okay, so those are practical questions. What are some resources I recommend for Christians thinking through these issues? Number one, the book Love Thy Body by Nancy Piercy. She's a professor, I think, at Houston Baptist University. It's a great book. It really develops an evangelical theology of the body. It talks not just about transgender, but also about sexuality. It's about how we treat our bodies and view them as how we should view them as Christians. I think she does a really good job of approaching this issue holistically. It's not just about one issue. It's about how you view everything from abortion to sex to gender. It is connected to how we view the body as something that God has given to us as something to steward. So again, really good book. Second book is Abigail Schreier's Irreversible Damage. She is not a Christian. I believe she's Jewish. She's a journalist. So she writes from a secular perspective. But this is a really interesting book about how there's been a rapid growth in the number of young adolescent girls identifying as transgender, and she wants to know why. And her hypothesis in this book, which is endorsed by a lot of other doctors, well, not all doctors by any means, but people that she interviews, is that there is an element of social fad going on where Young girls often feel uncomfortable in their bodies. They're going through puberty. They're also being told that men have it made, men own everything, men are oppressing you. So they feel like they are victims as women. They feel uncomfortable in their bodies because they're going through puberty. And transgender ideology gives them a way to say, no, you know what? I'm not a girl actually anymore. I'm a boy now. And so her hypothesis is that at least some of the rapid growth we're seeing among young girls, especially who are identifying as boys, could be in part due to social pressure and social influences. So again, it's just a fascinating book. Do I think she's definitely correct? I don't know, but I think it's definitely a hypothesis worth exploring. And I think also, if she's right, that a lot of this transgender, some of the transgender phenomena is driven not by by social pressure, we have to question the wisdom of giving kids puberty blockers, letting them undergo permanent surgeries. That's extremely life altering, and therefore we should be, even if I were completely secular, we should be hesitant to just jump headlong into this movement. We should really think about the repercussions. Okay, so again, a good book, definitely something to give you a lot to think about. Another book written by Christian Andrew T. Walker called God and the Transgender Debate. This is very practical, very pastoral. It's very easy to read. It's not nearly as Nancy Pearcey in her book goes deeply into the philosophy and the theology of the body. Walker gives you much more 10,000-foot view of these issues and practical suggestions for how you should relate or think about gender, relate to transgender friends or relatives. But it's a good book. And then finally, another very academic book, but very readable, very good book is Carl Trueman's book, The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. And he basically asked the question, what are the ideas, what are the assumptions we're swimming in as a culture? How do we think about identity? And where do those ideas come from historically? So he goes back hundreds of years and looks at how ideas about the self, about the what makes us who we are, how that has evolved over the last 200 or so years to where we are today. And he connects that largely to the discussion of transgender. So, but it is a very intellectual book. He's a church historian, but it's very good and rewarding. So if you really want to understand the ideas historically that led to where we are today, I recommend Trueman's Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. Okay, so that is all for me today. Thank you. If you want more on this, I have a number of book reviews on my website, shenviapologetics.com. You can find the slides for this talk there, just shenviapologetics.com/defend19. And my Twitter handle is @NeilShenvi. You'll find a lot of information there. I tweet about all kinds of issues related to race, gender, sexuality, and other issues. Frankly, I have to admit, I'm a reluctant culture warrior here. I don't really even think myself as a culture warrior. I got drawn into these issues because I was concerned that the way we're thinking about gender and race and sexuality is really influencing deeper things, like how we read the Bible, how we think about God. And because I want people to repent and believe the gospel, these other ways of thinking about power and knowledge and transgender, but that is actually becoming an obstacle to them hearing and believing the gospel. And so I want to present to them a way, the biblical way to think about these issues, to defend the traditional Christian view, but also I want to convince them that it will ultimately lead to flourishing. Because from a Christian perspective, what does Jesus say? The truth will set you free. So I truly believe that a correct view of gender will not just make us compassionate towards people who struggle with these issues, but ultimately embracing God's creation of gender is a way for us to flourish as human beings, because we're just living in God's universe. We really have to say, he's God and we're not, and he does know best. So anyway, so those are resources for you, and please go ahead and go to my website, look at the book reviews there, and thank you so much for your time.